Hello, BookTube, and welcome to this week's Book to Film, and it is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne, written in 1864, and the 20th Century Fox, Journey to the Center of the Earth, 1959, directed by Henry Levin, with James Mason, Arlene Dahl, Pat Boone, and the ever-gorgeous Diane Baker. And they're quite different things, but interesting. Jules Verne has been translated and still in print for some of his stuff, not everything, for a long time. And there's always been problems with translation. And there's an introduction by Jane Smiley here, and that's Jane Smiley by the author. And I mistakenly said that this was translated by Peter Cogman, but no, he was the editor of this. It's translated by Frank Wynne. And in the introduction, though, Jane Smiley mentions that like the problems that there were with previous translations. And here's an example, a couple things. Well, they expurgated several passages, but translations, other translators working, I'll quote here, other translators working in the 1870s and 80s were equally unreliable and even tendentious in their renderings. For example, W.H.G. Kingston, in translating The Mysterious Island, actually rewrote Captain Nemo's deathbed speech to make it less critical of British imperialism. So, and this is set, or translated correctly because, or wow, it's a more modern translation. And I'd not read this. This was done, I think it's 2008 by Penguin, 2009. And my readings of Jules Verne would have been the Victorian translations. And this is a short novel of his, and it's set in I'm going to say Nuremberg, is it? Sorry, I'm Hamburg, and it's about Professor Leidenbrock, and he's a professor of geology. He's got a few quirks. He has difficulty pronouncing words at times, like longer words. So he's sort of has become infamous for that and laughable for that reason. But his knowledge is unsurpassed. And the story is told in a sort of travelogue type I would say, a travelogue-ish by his nephew, Axel, who's been orphaned, and Professor Leidenbrock has taken him in, as well as his ward, which is his niece as well, Gronenberg. I think that's her name. Usually translated as Gretchen. And Axel is in love with her. It's his cousin, but well, oh well. And Professor Leidenbrock he's got a penchant for old books, and he's picked up a book which turns out to be he calls it Verne calls it by Snorre Sturluson. Which is actually Snorre Sturluson, an Icelandic historian that wrote, author of Kringla. Butchering that, I know, but that's the book that he has. But also he also written other things like the Prose Edda, and a lot of other Icelandic items. And in this book, which is it's an old book, antiquarian book. There's this little piece of paper that falls out of it that's sort of in runic characters, but in code, in a sense. And he's trying to find out what this is, and he finds out a signature that's sort of a faded signature on the in the book that it belonged to Arnie Saknussemm, which was an explorer several centuries before, and apparently had journeyed into the earth, but everybody thought he was insane. And his writings sort of don't exist anymore, or very, very little of his writings. But there's this little slip of paper that's in code, and Axel sort of figures out the decipher to it, but he doesn't want to tell his uncle because he knows his uncle is going to rush off to Iceland and pursue this. Because Axel, and he knows that he'll drag Axel along with him, and he wants to stay because he's in love with Groberg, his cousin. But he finally does tell him what it is, and it's basically saying that in June, that the sun from a nearby mountain will show the entrance to the underworld, like the center of the earth in a sense, or the entranceway, and that's in the crater Snaffles. What do they call it? Snaffles or Snuffles High Hook or something like that. And every time I hear that, I want to go Gesundheit after it. But yeah, so they set out for this journey, and they travel by land and boat, or land and sea. They get to Iceland. They mount. They get there just in time. They hire a local Icelandic hunter, and they travel into the interior of the earth, and they don't quite get to the center of the earth, but they find a lot of things. They find an inland sea with actually creatures, dinosaur leftovers, and man-like creatures. They find skeletons as well, and they do see briefly a 12-foot tall sort of human-like or ape-like creature that they've sort of run from. But they they want to cross this sea, so they make this raft and they go across, but they get into a storm and get thrown ashore, and they actually were sort of turned back, but they do find an area, another, they've been occasionally getting some symbols, or on the right track that Arnie Saknussemm has left. And there is this one tunnel, but it's filled up now with rubble. Obviously, well, they think it's obvious that it's happened since Arnie Saknussemm was there. So they have some explosives with them. But before I get to that, because that's near the end of the story, really, but it's sort of all couched in the fact of sort of the science and geology of the time. And they describe what the belief is and what the scientific theory is of the earth, geology, and so forth. And then by their experiences, they turn that on its head by saying that's not really the way it is, because they should be getting warmer as they get to the center of the earth, and the pressure and everything, but none of this is really sort of happening. They do feel the pressure to a certain extent of the several atmospheres, but they find that the current scientific belief is not really true, because they are not, dying of heat. There's air, and they have their own light source that they've brought with them, a induction coil that sort of winds up an electric light in a sense. But yeah, so we get back to this cavern, that is blocked, and it looks like it's sloping downward, so they figure that's the last leg to get to the center of the earth. And so they want to blow up the thing. So, you could just see what's happening in there, and there's sort of, to me, I'm thinking of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid film, where it's like, they blow up the train, or where the money is. Like, well, do you think you used enough explosives? So, they say, explain, are you sure, boys, this is what you want to do? So they blow it up, and obviously they cause the whole world that's there, with the dinosaurs and those humanish, or humanoid, beings that are living there, all destruction, because it's like it lifts up the water, and they get shoved into this tunnel on the raft, because they sort of move back into the water on the raft to, you know to not get hurt. But everything sort of goes in, and then they start going down, but then they start going up, and it starts getting hotter and hotter, and they're rising, like, you know really fast, through this vent, and because it's basically a volcanic eruption, and they find out that they're riding on lava after the water boils away, and the temperature is like, I don't know, like 70 or 80 degrees Celsius, and they're almost dying, but then they pop out of the volcano, in Italy, or is it Italy or Greece, but in the Mediterranean, and they all survive, and they go back, but they have no sort of evidence, for anything. So that's the book, and then we come to the film in 1959, and the screenplay was written by, uh, was it William Reich? Let me get the names correct here. Um, Walter Reich, and Charles Brackett. Charles Brackett produced it as well. He was the sort of writer as well, and producer for a lot of Billy Wilder films, and so they adapted this, for the film. And Leo Tover, a veteran cinematographer, and there's some good scenes in it. It's color. It's not. Well, I guess it must be. I'm not sure if it's a different color process, I think, than Technicolor. But it looks, this DVD. This is by Eureka. This DVD is beautiful. Like, the restoration of this is gorgeous. It is like, I've never seen it like this. As soon as I turned it on, the vibrant colors, because I just remembered muted colors, on TV, and like, it's years and years since I've seen it. Um, but anyway, yeah. So they wrote the screenplay, but they changed a lot. They doubled, because there was only three of them. The three characters, there was Professor Leidenbrook, and Axel, and the Icelandic hunter, that go into the center of the, or going underground. And in the film, they add three more characters. They add, well, they first of all, I should say, is that they add something which I think was pretty good. They added an urgency, a rival for this, because, and they switched it from Hamburg to Edinburgh, and Professor Linden Brock or Brook Lindenbrook is the professor, and instead of Axel, it's Alex. I think it's Alex. Yeah, he's not a relation. He's just a very smart student, played by Pat Boone, and James Mason was playing Professor uh, uh, Lindenbrook. Lindenbrook. And Diane Baker is his niece, Jenny, in here, not Gruben, in the book. And he instead of a book, they find this, like, wow, they buy him a sort of a present. The students buy him a present, the professor a present, an inkwell, But there was money left over, and Alex says that, he bought this. It was a volcanic rock, but it's very heavy. So the professor spends time and he finds out that there's something in it, and it turns out to be a plumb bob inside it, and it's got some writing on it from Arnie Saknussemm. And they know who the explorer was, but he just sort of disappeared in a volcano, went down into a volcano in Iceland and disappeared, like 3 centuries before, and that's all they ever knew. But this came up somewhere. I think it was in the Mediterranean or in Southeast Asia, out of a volcano, because they know the kind of lava it was, apparently. So anyway, so that's instead of the book, it's a plumb bob with a message written on it. And he writes off. He writes a letter, and he writes a letter to a colleague, Professor Gutenberg. But then he doesn't hear anything back, and then all of a sudden he finds out that the professor just disappeared. So the professor has taken that information and is going to go to Iceland and do this, do the journey. So Professor Lindenbrook decides to go as well, and he takes Alex along with him. But when they wind up in Iceland, they find out that the professor Grotenberg has been killed, and then his widow shows up, played by Carla Grotenberg, played by Arlene Dahl, and but he's been killed, and what it turns out is that he's been killed by a descendant of Arnie Saknussemm, Count Saknussemm, played by Thayer David, which does a really good role in it. He plays the count who is very superior and thinks that the underworld, the caves, it's his domain. He's the king of the underworld, sort of, in the earth. So there's still that urgency, because they sort of thought that the Grotenberg was finished with, but they realized they have a more evil rival in Count Saknussemm, who had killed Professor Grotenberg. But because Grotenberg had bought up all the equipment, they're struggling to find equipment, and they were getting a bit waylaid by Grotenberg, kidnapped, and so forth. But they solve all that. They get out, and they find that they have an Icelander, and so he goes with them, as in the book. They get an Icelander to go, and but because of all the equipment's been gone, the Carla Grotenberg, the widow, decides that she'll give them the equipment, but she's got to go with them. That's the stipulation. They don't want a woman along, but that's the only way they're going to have the equipment done correctly, or have the equipment. So they do that. They accept that, and she goes along. And then, as I say, the Icelander goes along, but he's got a duck called Gertrude. Okay, so Gertrude is another character in the film, in a sense. And then also they go down, but then the Count Saknussemm is there too. So there's 3 other characters, as I say. It's Count Saknussemm, there's Carla Grotenberg, and there's Gertrude, the duck. And they have adventures going through, and because Pat Boone is on there, he sings 2 songs that stayed in the film. One song to Jenny, Miss Jenny, on sort of the eve of them finding out of the plumb bob and stuff like this, because he's asked to dinner. And then another song while they just start walking downward into the interior, and he's got a little squeeze box, and he sings, sort of starts another song. and they all sort of sing along a little bit. Other songs that were done were cut out. The audio or the songs were recorded apparently, but they were cut out of the film, the final film. And so there's lots of well, there's the tension between her, Carla Gothenburg, and the professor. He's no longer a sort of absent-minded professor. He's single-minded, but he doesn't have trouble saying words or things like that. But there's this tension and sort of a romantic tension between Carla Gothenburg and him. As it turns out, in the end, they sort of get together after they come back. Um, but yeah, so and then there's the evil Count Saknussemm, which causes or creates, I should say, more tension and more thrilling things, because he's trying to get there first, and then he killed his aide. Probably they don't really say why, but probably because his servant or his aide didn't want to continue on. So then he tries to, because when Alex gets separated, he tries to get him to follow, but then they sort of meet up again and they sort of take him prisoner, but not in a prisoner sense. They want him killed, but none of them will actually pull the trigger in a sense for killing him. So they take him along as well. So they're now going through, and then they find this underwater sea like they do in the book. Um, and instead of people they just see some lizards that with fins on the back, and that's their dinosaurs. That's the special effects for that, and some of it, like a lot of the background while they're walking through the underground, and that it looks pretty good. A lot of it is studio. So a couple of places was actually some caverns, some actual caves. um, but most of it is in the studio, and it still holds up. It looks otherworldly. That's the thing, and the color makes it look interesting. Sometimes when they've got like the back projection, that looks quite bad. Like there's one at the beginning where the professor's walking, and he's supposed to be standing in front of like a book stall or a bookstore, and that looks really really bad. And then occasionally where they've got the overlap of the lizards and people, that looks funny, now, because the special effects have worked on. But when they have them separate, or the lizards here and then while they're walking, that looks pretty good. Like it still looks good. So the special effects were still hold up to a certain extent. Um, and they changed the thing that when they get the raft, they were going to cross the sea. Well, they're actually escaping the lizards as well, or the dinosaurs that are there. They're meat-eating dinosaurs. So, but then they actually do find the center of the Earth, the core of the Earth, because it's the magnetic core, and everything that's metal on the ship sort of gets pulled away, because it's where the both poles sort of meet. Um, and then there's this big sort of whirlpool, and they get thrown back up on the beach. Um, and they've lost all their food, they've lost everything, and the count Saknussemm kills and eats Gertrude, and about time as well. But then the Hans, the Icelander, tries to kill him, but they stop him. But he dies anyway with rocks falling on him. It was sort of like a thing that the heroes couldn't really kill somebody in a film. So that was sort of how this was. Hollywood wouldn't really allow that. The Breen office was still I'm not sure if it was still the Breen office at that point, but the censorship board was still working a little bit in the late 50s before it started losing its grip in the 60s. Uh, but yeah, and then they find Atlantis. They find Atlantis there, and they sort of realize that there is a shaft that's going up to the surface, so they figure they can get back that way, but there is a big boulder there. So again, they use explosives, but then they do start an earthquake and lava, and they get pushed up in a sort of an Atlantean um, shrine, and they get sent to the surface, but they get pop out onto the water in the Mediterranean. Except Axel, he somehow gets thrown into a tree with a bunch of nuns, and he's naked. Okay, and then they get back to, and it ends. They're back in Edinburgh, but he has no proof or anything. He asks basically. He wants to write his memoirs, so he's asking Carla Gutenberg to stay and ask them to marry him. And Axel had already married Miss Jenny there. But the other, it's like I say, it's good. It's just I wish they wouldn't have put the bloody duck in. That's just, like I think they did well with creating a film where they created other tension and urgency by having a rival and then having the evil Count Saknussemm. That all works, and I guess yeah, taking her along too. Like all that kind of works. It's just there's a lot of corny stuff in it. And it must have been corny then, because in the little booklet here there's a review that's reprinted from the New York Times, December 17th, 1959, by Bosley Crowther, was a big film critic of the time, and he didn't think much of it. And it is corny. There's a lot of corny bits in it, but it still is. I do like what they did for the most part with changing the story, because it could be kind of slow, or not slow so much, but just the three of them talking and doing things wouldn't really work that well. James Mason is a fabulous actor. Thayer David as well. The Icelandic they got is not very good, but he doesn't say much, and when he does speak, it's mostly in Icelandic. Arlene Dahl is perfectly fine actress, and she looks wonderful on the screen. Even in the privations of the underworld with not much light, she looks marvelous. Pat Boone is Pat Boone, and he's not an actor, but he's not terrible at times. Like his presence is okay, but then when he tries to act, especially like he's occasionally trying to put on, his name is Alex McEwen, so he's supposed to be Scottish, and he's trying to put on a Scottish accent, and occasionally he gets a couple words that are semi-Scottish accent, and the rest, like, it's just, he's not believable as a Scotsman at all. And even James Mason is supposed to be, he says, fellow Scotsman at the end, and it's like, well, or fellow Scots, I think he says. Uh, and he doesn't even pretend to put on a Scottish accent. He's just got an English accent. Um, and Diane Baker, I don't even think she tried to put on an accent, Scottish, English, or otherwise. And also that's in there as a small part on a few occasions. Alan Napier as the dean, and most people know him as the what's his name, Alfred Pennyweather. Is it Pennyweather or Pennyworthy, from Batman series? But he was a good actor. In things, he was just always very tall, very skinny, and yeah, no, it's I like what it's done. It's just there are some really corny bits in it, like the bloody duck. They should have nixed the duck so long before that. It's just, it's like they're trying to make it for kids. So so there is a brilliance to it in a sense, because it'll fit all ages. Kids could watch this, and apparently, in some recent screenings, according to the um, commentary, that children loved it, even though it's like 2 hours long, or 2 hours and 10 minutes long almost, and it takes 50 minutes before they actually step inside a cave to go to the to go underground. Like, it takes 50 minutes lead up to that, but it still works. It still works, and the commentary is fabulous. The commentary has Diane Baker, uh, historian Stephen C. Smith, and Nick Redman. Stephen C. Smith had written a biography of Bernard Herman, who did the music score to this, and it is a brilliant music score. And I don't really talk enough about, I don't think, the music and stuff. But Bernard Herman was fantastic. He started out with uh, the Mercury Theater with Orson Welles, and then did Citizen Kane, and did, well, he did, but it never wound up in the final version of the Magnificent Ambersons. And then his big fame was with Hitchcock, basically. But he was a wonderful um, um, music score, writer of music for films. But the commentary is fabulous because Diane Baker, who went to a lot of films. This was like her third film, possibly. She was in Anne Frank. She was very young in this. She's 19, 19, 20 years old, and but her commentary is so good because the insights, the stuff that she saw during the mid 50s, and how she grew up in sort of the Hollywood milieu, and her other acting and the other things that she did, to producing. And she taught for decades, and she ran a school of acting. She is like, I don't know when the commentary was done exactly, but she must have been, she's still alive. She's like 83, so she must have been in her 70s at least, late 70s, mid to late 70s, when she did commentary. Still, just, her memory's pretty good, and it's really it's a fabulous commentary. Not all to do with Journey to the Center of the Earth, but just the whole Hollywood of the time, and it's just marvelous. She is just amazing. That's all I can say. And many people probably do know her, but can't sort of recollect her name. She was in TV, lots of stuff. She was even in Silence of the Lambs. She played, I think, a senator or something like that. She had a small part in Silence of the Lambs, so she was still acting. Or I don't know when the last time she's acted, but at least in the 90s she was acting. Uh, and everybody, well, Pat Boone is still alive. He's in his 80s, I think. And this was actually the first kiss that he had on screen, so that was a big thing at the time. So but it is a good film for entertainment wise. Like I say, you got Pat Boone for the eye candy for women and others. You've got Diane Baker, who's gorgeous, and Arlene Dahl, who's just gorgeous on screen, with her red hair. She actually married for a while Fernando Lamas, and she's the mother of Lorenzo Lamas. Um, she just died at the end of November in 2021. So the only two I think that are left alive is Diane Baker and Pat Boone. Pat Boone didn't want to do the film. He didn't want to do it at all, but his stipulation was that he would get a huge percentage of the or not a huge, but a bigger percentage of the box office. It cost like 3.5 million, I think, to make, and it made like 10 million worldwide or something like that, or close to that. So he did really well off this, and he got more money than James Mason, who was an actual actor, a good actor, and apparently, like they talk about how James Mason doesn't upstage him anywhere in the scenes, and he might have personally thought this was unfair, but he just did, as usual, the best job he could for the director. And yeah, so it is a great, it's early science fiction, sort of, well, 1950s. There's so much bad things about 1950s science fiction, but the bad things actually sometimes are good things as well, in a roundabout way. But this one is just, it's visually stunning, And as I say, they did some nice changes to the book. I think by creating the nemesis and rival and things like that. That's really well. And at the time you got to have a love interest. So they have, I would have preferred to have Diane Baker more on the screen. But Arlene Dahl's not bad either. So, but yeah, it's a good film. If you haven't seen it, do. And if you have seen it, see if you can get a restored version of it, and you will see it with different eyes. It is quite amazing. So that ends this week's book to film. Next week will be the what is it? The Benson murder case. I think it's Final Vance. It's a book that I read. I'm going to be streaming this on YouTube, um, and I'll be doing that one for next week. And until then, BookTube, take care.